Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 9 tight end start or sit decisions for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, we're going to be going in depth into every single matchup from all of the Sunday games all the way until Monday Night Football, and I'll be telling you guys whether I believe you should start or sit the tight ends in every single matchup. But before we can get on into things, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure to leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. And if you would like to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. The link to my Twitter is also down below in the video description. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 9 tight end start or sit decisions. We begin with the first game on Sunday, the Atlanta Falcons at the New Orleans Saints. In this game, Taysom Hill will not be the starting quarterback, surprisingly, for the Saints. Now, some people might say, hey, that isn't much of a surprise. Trevor Siemian looked good last week, and I do agree. Trevor Siemian did play quite well in relief of Jameis Winston after he ended up getting hurt in that game, but Sean Payton was talking a lot about how it was going to be Taysom Hill, so my personal belief was to side with head coach Sean Payton and believe that Taysom Hill was going to get the start in this game. He will not. It will be Mr. Trevor Siemian. But does that mean that it's going to be Trevor Siemian going forward? To me, probably not. I do think next week, if Taysom Hill is good to go, he will be the starting quarterback of the team. How does that affect the New Orleans Saints from the tight end position? To me, not at all. Adam Trautman is not a guy that is super involved in this offense, and I'd rather just look to a different tight end over Adam Trautman at this point in the season. Sure, he is involved in some games, but a lot of the time, we're not seeing a lot of Adam Trautman, and typically, when they get near the red zone, they're looking to use Juwan Johnson anyways, and that does hurt Adam Trautman's value. So at the end of the day, I'm just not very comfortable starting Adam Trautman. The news with Trevor Siemian does definitely affect some other aspects of the team, more importantly, Mr. Alvin Kamara, who I was starting to get a little bit nervous about if Taysom Hill was going to be the starting quarterback, because if you look back to last year when Taysom Hill was playing, he was taking a lot of these rushing opportunities from Alvin Kamara by just rushing the ball himself. He wasn't dumping the ball off as much to Alvin Kamara as Drew Brees would last year. Now, Alvin Kamara hasn't been seeing all that many dump-offs this year, but it would definitely affect him with Taysom Hill in the game, because I think Taysom Hill would be stealing some carries away from him. So at the end of the day, this is a much better move for Alvin Kamara than it is for the rest of the team. I understand that Alvin Kamara is a running back, and this is a tight end video, but I figured I would say it since we are talking about the game. For the Atlanta Falcons, Kyle Pitts is going to be a start for me. He definitely had a rocky start to his 2021 NFL season. In his rookie year, he started off a little bit slow, but as of recently, he has caught on fire, and the guy has been putting up big numbers game in and game out. I think he has a decent spot here up against the New Orleans Saints without Calvin Ridley. For this game and for the foreseeable future, we should see a very high dosage of Kyle Pitts going forward. Next up, we move to the Denver Broncos at the Dallas Cowboys. The Broncos are going to be without Mr. Noah Fant in this game, and that elevates Albert O to be the starting tight end of the team. I believe that if Noah Fant was not here, if he was on a different team, then Albert O would be a top-end tight end in fantasy football. I really do believe that. I think he has the build to be successful. We have seen flashes of Albert O. We've definitely seen it with Teddy Bridgewater, with him throwing the ball to him a couple of times. Now, obviously, Albert O doesn't have these crazy fucking stats because he's the tight end number 2 on the Denver Broncos, but I believe when he's given the opportunity to be the number 1 guy on the team, I'm going to be very excited to fire up Mr. Albert O this week. I can't fully pronounce his last name, and I don't want to sound like a fucking idiot, so we're just going to call him Albert O. For the Dallas Cowboys, Dalton Schultz will be listed as a start for me. He is definitely a more touchdown-dependent tight end, and it really does depend on the fact that Dak Prescott continues to lock into Dalton Schultz and doesn't start looking towards Blake Jarwin, because we have seen Blake Jarwin have some solid games thus far this season. Again, he's not very fantasy relevant when compared to Dalton Schultz, and that's why we do talk about Dalton Schultz in these videos. So I do think Dalton Schultz does have the opportunity to have a big game, but he is one of those tight ends that heavily hinges on the fact that he scores a touchdown in this game. Next up, we move to a matchup between the New England Deflatriots at the Carolina Panthers. When it comes to the Patriots tight ends, a lot of people have continued to try to talk themselves into Jonnu Smith. Now, Jonnu Smith was a very solid tight end, in my opinion, in Tennessee, and I still believe that he is a very solid tight end for the Patriots this year in terms of real life in terms of the NFL, but for fantasy football, the guy just does not get enough opportunities. In the red zone especially, Hunter Henry is just peppered with targets, whereas Jonnu Smith is nowhere to be found. You can basically put up a fucking missing poster inside of Gillette Stadium because no one knows where Jonnu Smith is once they get to the red zone, so Hunter Henry is getting all of those high-value targets inside of the red zone, and Jonnu Smith isn't, so Jonnu Smith will be listed as a sit for me. I still do believe he's a pretty solid tight end for the purposes of NFL, but for fantasy football, Hunter Henry is definitely the guy to have. He also sees more targets in a majority of games for the Carolina Panthers. They have Ian Thomas, they have Tommy, make that ass tremble, and potentially without mono man Sam Darnold and PJ Walker being the starting quarterback, I just don't really want too much to do with the Carolina Panthers offense this week, obviously aside from DJ Moore and Christian McCaffrey, who seems like he's going to suit up on Sunday. Next up, we move to the Minnesota Vikings at the Baltimore Ravens. In this game, I like both of the tight ends. Obviously, at this point in the season, you're going to love starting Mr. Maki Mock Andrews, tight end of the Baltimore Ravens. The whole AFC playoff picture is just so crazy because we've seen games where the Baltimore Ravens look fucking unstoppable, where they look unbeatable, and then we've seen other games where the Ravens kind of struggle. To me, they are a very good team, and it seems as though Mark Andrews is going to be heavily targeted game in and game out. He's one of the top 5 tight ends in fantasy football in most weeks, so you're definitely going to roll him out here up against a not-so-hot Minnesota Vikings defense. For the Vikings, we got Tyler Conklin. He's one of those guys that hinges heavily on a touchdown, but if you're not one of those top 5, top 6 tight ends in fantasy football who are just basically like a wide receiver out there, just seeing so many targets game in and game out, your value is really going to be hinging on scoring that touchdown, and that is entirely possible this week that we may see a more high-scoring back-and-forth affair between Mr. You Like That Kirk Cousins and Lamar Jackson, so I think that Tyler Conklin could be in for a solid showing this week up against the Baltimore Ravens. Next up, we got the Cleveland Browns at the Cincinnati Bengals, and Odell is finally gone. Odell has been released from the Cleveland Browns. Where will he get signed? I believe we will see on Monday when the waivers go through, and we'll get to see who he goes to. Leave your prediction down below in the comment section. Where does Odell Beckham Jr. go? If I'm being honest with you, I don't really see him going to one of those good teams where people want him to go, like the Patriots or the Green Bay Packers or something like that. I think he ends up being like a Detroit Lion or ends up going to the Jaguars or the Houston Texans or something because they just have such high waiver priority that it would be very hard for Odell to fall all the way down that far in the waiver priority for one of the better teams to get him, like the Raiders. So I do think that Odell is going to end up signing to a much worse team, and that's probably not going to make him very happy either. At the end of the day, though, that really has nothing to do with this. So we're back on in talking about the tight ends. Mr. CJ Uzomah is going to be listed as a start in this game up against the Cleveland Browns. Uzomah seems as though he's just one of those tight ends that it wouldn't surprise me at all any given week if you told me, hey, Nick, CJ Uzomah scored 2 fucking touchdowns, because he's done it twice this season, and it is entirely possible that he does it up against the Browns because this Bengals offense has looked amazing. But, Nick, they lost to the Jets last week. Doesn't that mean that they're bad? To me, no, that's not what it means. I think that the Bengals were just looking way past the Jets, right? They're just looking straight towards the Cleveland Browns. Like, you know what? Let's look towards the Browns. It is what it is. Like, if we're just half paying attention, we're going to absolutely ass fuck the Jets defense, but that's not what happened. The Jets end up winning the game. It is what it is. I think CJ Uzomah is definitely worthy of a start in this matchup. Next up for the Cleveland Browns, we have Austin Hooper, who would be a sit for me. The Browns are one of the only teams that truly utilize a tight end by committee. They don't use just one tight end. They don't use just 2 tight ends. They use basically 3 tight ends every single game, which makes all of them unusable. Now, one of them, it wouldn't surprise me if, hey, Austin Hooper has a good game or David Njoku has a good game, but it is damn near impossible to predict at this point in the season, so I'd rather just look away from any of these tight ends until maybe we see some consistency that, hey, Hooper has like 3 good games in a row. Then I'll be all over the Hooper bandwagon, but it doesn't seem like we're going to see that this year. Next up, we move to the Buffalo Bills at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Dawson Knox, one time, if you're with me, is not going to be playing in this game. Dan Arnold, get to the chopper, is the starting tight end of the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Buffalo Bills will roll out Mr. Tommy Sweeney. Dan Arnold is going to be a start-worthy tight end for me. He played quite well last week in that game for the Jacksonville Jaguars. It does seem as though Trevor Lawrence loves to throw him the ball. Will he provide that same amount of value up against the Bills? Probably not, but we have seen tight ends play positively up against the Buffalo Bills, and I think Dan Arnold will be just a decent start, not a guy that I'm clamoring for becoming a top 5 tight end on the week, but a guy that I do see some value in, so he will be listed as a start. For me, Tommy Sweeney just really doesn't show anything. He's not Dawson Knox, so to me, I would just rather look elsewhere if you're really looking to punt the tight end position this week, especially if you're in a deeper league. I don't know why else anyone would be looking at Tommy Sweeney. Next up, we got the Houston Texans at my Miami Dolphins, but before we hear about this game, I would like to ask, if you have ended up enjoying thus far, please make sure to hit that like button down below, as well as hitting that subscribe button. It would help me out a ton. I would greatly appreciate it. So Mike Licky Amagasiki is going to be a start for the Miami Dolphins. Does Tua play is a big question, because they're talking about how Tua's banged up. It's a hand injury, something with one of his fingers. Doesn't sound great. But at the end of the day, even if it's Mr. Jacoby Brissett, Mr. Jacoby Brisket, I don't really care, because Mike Gesicki put up solid fantasy football value with Brissett as well as with Tua, so I wouldn't really worry too much about that. Plus, they're going up against the Houston Texans. I do believe that Tua's going to play. Seems like Brian Flores, head coach of the Dolphins, seems pretty confident in that as well, so I'd definitely be fine starting Mr. Mike Licky Amagasiki in this game for the Texans. They've got Jordan Akins. They also used other players, and while Tyrod Taylor is back, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Houston Texans just beat the fuck out of the Miami Dolphins, because the Dolphins are a dumpster fire at this point. I don't really think you want anything to do with the Houston tight ends. Next up, we move to the Las Vegas Raiders at the New York Football Giants. Darren Waller, if he does play, now this is also up in the air if Darren Waller's going to play or not. The last report that I found on Darren Waller was that he was practicing on Wednesday, so my best guess is that he will end up playing up against the Giants. If he does not end up playing, then you can easily pivot to Foster Moreau. Foster Moreau did play well in Darren Waller's absence 2 weeks ago. Last week, the Raiders were on bye, which definitely, to me, makes me a little bit more confident that Darren Waller is going to end up playing. I assume he goes in this game again. If not, you're going to be playing Foster Moreau. For the New York Football Giants, Evan Ingram, Mr. Easy E, Kyle Rudolph is there as well. I just don't trust it. I really don't. I think that Daniel Jones is actually starting to show some promise, and he's shown flashes throughout his whole NFL career. Some games, Daniel Jones legitimately looks good, and you're like, wow, that's why the Giants drafted him. And then there's other times in the exact same game where the man just throws an interception for no reason, or just fumbles the ball, does some crazy shit that ends up turning the rock over. I do think that if Evan Ingram was getting a lot more usage, especially deeper down on the field, I should say, then Evan Ingram would have a lot of fantasy value. But to me, I would rather just start some other option. Next up, we got the LA Chargers at the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, something that very much concerns me in this game is the Philadelphia Eagles offense and how they are going to end up working, because last week they ran a run-heavy, pound-ya-ass into the Detroit Lions by just running the ball a million times. Will that work up against the LA Chargers? Potentially, because the Chargers' run defense is absolute dog shit. But the question is, will Jalen Hurts be able to throw enough in this game to provide value to the other weapons outside of Dallas Goedert? Because even last week, when Jalen Hurts wasn't throwing the ball at a very high rate, especially late on in the game, you're normally used to Jalen Hurts doing nothing early on, and then like the fourth quarter, he pulls the rabbit out of his hat and throws like 3 fucking touchdowns, runs in a touchdown or something crazy, and just gets a bunch of fantasy points. But last week, that was not the case. Dallas Goedert did still have an alright showing. I think he should be fine up against the LA Chargers, but going forward, I'm a little bit nervous about Mr. Jalen Hurts. For the LA Chargers, Jared Cook, they also have Donald Parham, tight end of the LA Chargers. To me, I don't know. I just don't really trust Jared Cook at this point in the season. The LA Chargers offense just has so many weapons for Justin Herbert, the pervert, to throw the ball to, so I'm not all that confident in Jared Cook. Next up, we move to the Green Bay Packers at the Kansas City Chiefs, and I think that while Travis Kelce had a down game last week up against the Giants, you got to play Travis Kelce. You drafted him in like the first round, maybe the second round. I understand. But Nick, the draft was like 9 weeks ago. Why do you care about that? Because there's a reason why you valued Travis Kelce so high. Do not just go ahead and run away from Kelce due to one bad game. I am very excited to start him this week up against the Green Bay Packers. I think you should be as well. I love Travis Kelce this week without Robert Tonyan, Mr. Big Bub Tonyan, being there for the Green Bay Packers. Mercedes Lewis is the tight end #1 there. They also have other tight ends that they throw the ball to. They're also going to be with Jordan Love in this game. Probably should just sit Mercedes Lewis, right? That's probably your best bet without Mr. Aaron Rodgers, Mr. Discount Double Check. Next up, we got the Arizona Cardinals at the San Francisco 49ers. They're calling Kyler Murray truly questionable. To me, I think he's more on the doubtful side. I don't think he's going to play. I mean, we saw reports like a couple days ago that this motherfucker wasn't going to play until week like 11. Now we're seeing reports that he might play this week. I don't know if I buy that. But at the end of the day, even with Colt McCoy under center, I am still fine playing Zach Ertz because of the fact that he is just very involved in this offense. But I'm nowhere near as high on Zach Ertz as I normally would be if the short king himself, Kyler Murray, does not end up playing. Seems as though Mr. George Kittle me Timbers is going to start in this game. We haven't seen George Kittle in weeks at this point. He was, at the beginning of the season, just a complete and utter fucking unmitigated disaster for fantasy football. He wasn't really seeing all that many targets, but before he ended up getting hurt those last 2 games, he was being targeted more heavily and at a higher rate. So I do expect George Kittle to have a pretty solid showing this week up against the Arizona Cardinals with Mr. Jimmy Guap, Jimmy G-Spot, Jimmy Garoppolo. Next up, we move to the LA Titans at the LA Rams. In this one, I'm going to be firing up Mr. Tyler Higbee. Now, with Tyler Higbee, you are really hinging on the touchdown for him. When they move up the field so effortlessly, just throwing the ball to Robert Woods, to Cooper Kupp, running the rock with Darrell Henderson, we haven't been seeing all that high usage for Tyler Higbee, but we do see him get some work inside of the red zone, and I do believe this is a game that they're going to be able to put up some big points in. The Tennessee Titans defense, frankly, is not all that good, so shouldn't surprise you if Higbee has a solid showing. Anthony Ferkser and the other Tennessee Titans tight ends just like they're just guys, right? They're out there on the field. If Ferkser scores, then you're going to be happy, but I don't really see all that high of a chance of that happening in this game, so I'd rather leave him on the bench. Next up, we've moved to the final game, Monday Night Football between the Chicago Bears at the Pittsburgh Steelers. It seems as though Eric Ebron's not going to play in this game, which would make me want to start Mr. Pat Firemouth. He did look good last week in that game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He is a very talented player. He's someone that I've talked about a lot during this season as not a guy that you want to be starting, but as a guy that, hey, if Eric Ebron was not here, then I actually think that Firemouth would be in a very good situation to succeed and that he would prosper in that situation. And that's the scenario that we were in last week, and I believe that's going to be the scenario that we're in this week up against the Chicago Bears. If Ebron is not able to go, then I am confident firing up Mr. Pat Firemouth with some upside to score tug in this matchup. Cole Kmet for the Chicago Bears. It was a little bit interesting, right? We've seen a little bit more of Kmet for the Chicago Bears, but I do believe that with Matt Nagy coming back off the COVID to be able to coach for the Chicago Bears, things are just going to be a fucking disaster. We see the light at the end of the tunnel. Holy shit, look at this Bears team. Look at Justin Fields without Matt Nagy. Look how great it looks. And then somehow, some way, the team didn't see what happened and didn't just fire Matt Nagy instantly. Like, holy shit, look how good the Bears offense looks without this bozo being there, right? Because, oh, but Nick, Bill Lazor is calling the plays, and I think he is. But I still think that Matt Nagy has some sort of input into this offense that is completely butt-fucking this offense. So I just don't want to be starting too many Bears at this point in the season. So Cole Kmet is going to be a sit for me. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying today's video, please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below, as well as leaving a like on today's video. I would appreciate it a ton. I love you guys all. I hope you have a great rest of your guys' day. And as always, good boy.